Coming up tonight on VCU InSight, the highest voter turnout in modern history, but without the election day crowds. We've got a recap of a historic election. Using space, VCU student leaders are asking the university to turn this empty building into a cold weather shelter this winter. Plus, a toast to racial equality. One local brewing company calls this drink stronger than hate. VCU InSight starts right now.
From the Richard T. Robertson School of Media and Culture at Virginia Commonwealth University, named Best Student Newscast in the Mid-Atlantic, this is VCU InSight.
Good evening and welcome to VCU InSight. I'm Orzo Haji-Gurban. Election day's over and it took a while to see how things shook out, but now we know. Sam Hooper has a roundup of the results.
VCU and the Richmond area had some crucial races on the ballot: President, U.S. Senate, Richmond Mayor, Richmond City Council, and 2 Virginia constitutional amendments. According to Virginia Department of Elections, Joe Biden won the Richmond area with almost 83% of the vote, tallying around 86,000 votes. In the U.S. Senate race, Democrat Mark Warner defeated Republican Daniel Gade. Warner got about the same number of votes as Biden, winning 83% of the Richmond vote. In the mayoral race, incumbent LeVar Stoney is keeping his seat. He got about 38,000 votes, which is about 37% of the total votes cast. He led the vote count in 6 of Richmond's 9 districts. You have to get the majority of the votes in 5 districts to win. Richmond City Council was also on the ballot, and the 5th district makes up most of the Phantom VCU area. In this race, former VCU student Stephanie Lynch won re-election with 6,700 votes, which is about 58% of the total votes in the district. There were also 2 Virginia constitutional amendments on the ballot. The first was to establish a redistricting commission to help with gerrymandering. This amendment passed with roughly 70% of the vote. The second was a property tax break for automobiles owned by veterans with a disability. That passed too with about 80% of the vote. Reporting for VCU InSight, I'm Sam Hooper.
A record number of voters turned out for the 2020 election, but without traditional registration drives, getting voters signed up was a challenge. Lucy Stumpo looked into how one organization made it work.
Since many college campuses were unable to do in-person voter registration for this year's election, Safi and Azami and other organizations had to turn to the phone and Zoom.
We're getting so close to the election, it's really important that we're having both ourselves and volunteers helping us, call these young people and making sure they're showing up to vote.
Nizami worked to register both VCU and University of Mary Washington students. Along with calling students, NextGen also hosted informational Zoom meetings to educate students on who will appear on the ballot, polling locations, and other tips to make voting easier.
Just last Saturday, we provided free lifts to and from early vote polling places for VCU students because, the earlier you vote, the better, the less likely you are to have something go wrong.
Early voting exploded across the nation this year, and Virginia was no exception. Many young voters certainly took advantage of either in-person early voting or voting by mail.
After the 2016 election, VCU was recognized as a top college for student voting. Over 61% of VCU students voted that year, while the national average for college students was about 50%.
I've made sure a lot of my friends are registered to vote and all of that because it's definitely an important election. We're seeing with the turnout is a lot higher because how important it is.
While final voter turnout numbers haven't been tallied just yet for college-aged voters, the 2020 election did see record-breaking turnout across the nation. For VCU InSight, I'm Lucy Stumpo.
This election day saw record voter turnout, but not as many people at the polls on election day. Ben Malikoff asked voters why they decided to vote on November 3rd rather than earlier in the month.
Over 70,000 Richmond voters cast their ballots early. This precinct here at the ICA saw about 150 voters by 11 a.m., with about 1,500 voters registered to vote at this location.
I wanted to vote early, but I couldn't get to it because I had school and everything like that. And so I wanted to drop my ballot off, but I haven't gotten it yet in the mail. So I just decided to come out today and just do it.
For some voters like Mark Lewis, waiting until the last day was their only option.
Kind of procrastinated, kind of also just didn't have time.
And with widespread concern about mailing in ballots, voters like Choquet and Lewis wanted to be there on election day to make sure their vote is counted.
I think, one, it's a safer option, and then also it is a better schedule for me because it's a day off, so we could just do it today.
A Pew Research poll found that more Biden voters were planning to vote by mail or early in person than Trump voters who were more likely to say they were voting in person on Election Day. That could make election returns hard to interpret for the first few hours after the polls close. By Election Day, 2.7 million Virginians had already voted, quadruple the number who early voted in 2016. Reporting from our Richmond studios, I'm Ben Malikoff.
The top spot in Richmond city government was on the ballot. Current Mayor LeVar Stoney ended up holding on to his seat. Tim Corley had a chance to talk with him before Election Day.
In one of the most bizarre elections in recent memory, Mayor LeVar Stoney has won his second term as mayor. Mayor Stoney believed this election would set the tone for Richmond for the foreseeable future.
The next decade may be the most critical, one of the most critical decades ahead of for the city.
Under the Stoney administration, 3 new public schools have been built: Henry L. Marsh III Elementary School, Cardinal Elementary School, and River City Middle School, which is something Mayor Stoney is very proud of.
That's a promise I made, and that's a promise I kept. So I'm very, very proud of that. And I think those 3 new schools may be my greatest thus far.
With Richmond being the former capital of the Confederacy, an entire street was dedicated to the Confederate soldiers. Mayor Stoney's administration decided to take down those reminders of oppression that stood on Monument Avenue.
That's why I took the bold steps to remove the monuments on Monument Avenue, the Confederate monuments, the Confederate monuments throughout the city of Richmond. We've removed more Confederate monuments than any locality in the United States of America.
One thing he was not able to accomplish as mayor was the Navy Hill project. The project was going to replace the Richmond Coliseum and rebuild part of downtown Richmond. The project was struck down by City Council, and Mayor Stoney believed there's something else at play.
It was clear politics. One of my opponents launched her campaign on the rejection of Navy Hill.
With news breaking on a seemingly regular basis of police brutality, a point of emphasis for every candidate is police reform.
I'm not one to believe in slashing the police department's budget, because guess what? Slashing budgets does not rip out systemic racism. Funding the change, funding the training that they need to operate in communities of color.
Once enough of the vote had come in to show Stoney with a solid lead, he took to social media to announce he'd be sticking around for another 4 years. Stoney has received a number of messages congratulating him on his re-election through social media, including Governor Ralph Northam. Stoney has made many promises for his second term. We'll see if he can keep them. For VCU InSight, I'm Tim Corley.
In this year's presidential election, voters had to choose between 2 competitive candidates, but what about a third option? InSight's Katie Mooney caught up with voters and experts to gain an independent perspective on the election.
I guess we do it, or I do it, because it's really the only honest thing to do.
For the last 20 years, Mitchell Bupp has proudly voted independent.
When you're an independent, I think people are looking more for honesty in government. And we really haven't had that, in the last few years.
Bupp is among the less than 1% of Americans who vote for candidates that aren't Republican or Democrat. He believes that the current 2-party system is corrupt. Voting independent is his way of voicing this opinion.
It's essentially, having 2 supermarkets, and there's no other place to really shop. And all the mom and pops have been shut down.
Despite his opinion, Bupp realizes it's virtually impossible for an independent to become president. I spoke with Dr. Amanda Winterseek, a VCU professor of political science, to put all this into perspective.
Well, let me basically say this. No third-party candidate will ever win the presidency.
Harsh, but with the rules of the elections being the way they are, it's true. Basically, to win a presidential election, Winterseek says you have to overhaul the whole electoral system, from how candidates get on the ballot to how each state's voting system works.
And not just the system, 50 different systems of voting. Because we don't have one system of voting. Every state has its own system of voting.
Not only that, but it would require millions of people in the U.S. to totally rethink their political affiliation.
That is, it's not so easy to take somebody who identifies strongly as a Republican or as a Democrat and say, oh, go be a libertarian now, right? That fundamentally requires them to rethink who they are as a person.
Despite independents being unsuccessful in presidential races, Winner Seek says independents are actually fairly successful in local elections. Reporting from Richmond, I'm Katie Mooney.
Joe Biden won Virginia with 54% of the vote. InSight's Lauren Bray got some reaction from those happy about the Biden win.
Joe Biden has been officially named the next president of the United States. Many voters here in Richmond are celebrating this historic win. Many voters are saying they are excited about the new presidency, but the work isn't over yet. Some people are hoping that people will continue to protest and work towards change as there is still work to be done.
Well, I was extremely excited for the Biden-Harris ticket. I think that, it's really important for America at this point to give back to being a united America.
Voters like Bray are expressing their hope to see things change in their community after months of civil unrest.
I think we just need to get over the two political parties and just work out for everybody as a good for the country.
This current presidency has affected everyone differently. Many people here in Richmond are excited about the new president-elect.
I'm very excited about Biden winning. I think that the country is ready for a big change.
Adrian Ellis is a registered voter and says she was excited to see the voter turnout. She says she can't wait to see what will happen next.
I know the last election, a lot of folks sat at home and they didn't go out and vote. So this time it was just really exciting to see everyone getting out and motivated to elect our next president.
Reporting for VCU InSight, I'm Lauren Bray.
Members of VCU student government are demanding that the university convert an unused building on campus into a homeless shelter. Here's InSight's Trey Smith.
With temperatures dropping, VCU student leaders want the university to turn this building into a cold weather shelter this winter.
It seems like having multiple options for housing in overflow when it's cold outside is a prudent strategy when trying to deal with housing instability on cold nights.
The building was once home to a nightclub called Mansion 534. Richmond has announced at least one cold weather shelter for this winter, but it won't be at its normal location at the Giles Center in Chaco Valley. VCU social work professor Dr. Maurice Gaddis worries that the closing of the Giles Center will impact those who relied on it regularly.
It provides sort of adequate, stable housing for people to access, at least when it was cold weather as an overflow shelter.
The VCU Student Government Association released a press release demanding that the unused building be converted into a shelter. According to the SGA statement, the building located here at 534 North Harrison Street was bought by VCU in 2018 and has currently not been used since. Kelly King Horn is the executive director of Homeward. Her organization coordinates homeless services in the greater Richmond region. She says that expanding on existing programs would be more helpful than a separate VCU facility.
Than having facilities that aren't linked and integrated, when we come together, then we can use the dollars better, but more importantly, we can do a better job of meeting the complex needs of each person or family who comes in. So having a separate VCU facility, I'm not sure if that was the proposal, isn't as helpful.
The city did announce one location for a cold weather shelter this winter. It'll be in a hotel off of Midlothian Turnpike. Horn also says that there are other homeless services and programs that many don't know about, such as the Safety Net Shelter, which provides daily health services amid the pandemic.
They've been doing COVID testing for people experiencing homelessness and homeless services staff, and giving guidance to all of us on how best to reduce the risk for COVID.
Reporting for VCU InSight, I'm Trey Smith.
Fighting for racial justice with a custom brew. InSight's Alyssa Harris checked out a pour with a purpose.
It's cold, it's refreshing, it's stronger than hate.
There was a program earlier this summer, a national beer program called Black is Beautiful, where tons and tons of craft breweries brewed their own take on a beer and donated the proceeds.
Local brewing company Ardent Craft Ales released the new beer in late October. 100% of the proceeds are going to the Urban League of Greater Richmond Young Professionals. The group has been empowering the African American community since 1913.
This specific organization kept going up over and over, so we looked into the Urban League Young Professionals and loved what they did with the money they collected. We loved how transparent they were and how it seems like the money they collect makes immediate impacts on the people that they are serving, and it just seemed like a perfect fit.
Ardent employees told me that they recognize that African American citizens are at a disadvantage when it comes to systemic racism and believe that acknowledging the problem first is the first step.
We wanted to do more than just put the message out there. We wanted to do something and actually fundraise for a specific cause.
As for the beer itself, it's an Imperial Milk Stout with hints of dark chocolate, and everyone I talked to seemed to like it. With VCU InSight, I'm Lissa Harris.
In the middle of the pandemic and a summer of protests, one small business owner found a way to give back. InSight's Jasmine Speller has her story.
Barbara Haynes Perez is a senior pre-med student at George Mason and the president and treasurer of Lambda Pi Chi sorority. And at the beginning of 2020, she officially started her business, Mil Rosa Crochet.
The main reason I started the business was to help my family in Venezuela and then eventually help other families in Venezuela. I mainly make crochet clothing, but I can also make accessories like bags and headbands.
She sells her creations on her website. They're all handmade and made with a purpose in mind. Haynes Perez says she wants her work to support causes like Black Lives Matter.
That we're all guilty of the same history and the same torment against Black people, and that history hasn't stopped because we're still enacting in it today.
When the Black Lives Matter protests grew over the summer, she decided to use her business to help the African American community. She hosted a raffle where people could buy tickets with a chance to win different prizes. All proceeds went to various Black Lives Matter organizations, including the RVA bail bonds to help those who were arrested while protesting.
In total, I donate with the raffle plus my own, it was about $800.
Haynes Perez is planning to do another Black Lives Matter fundraiser in February in celebration of Black History Month. Her sorority is also planning on doing an online banquet with Black fraternities and sororities to discuss racial issues. For VCU InSight, I'm Jasmine Speller.
For many Richmond families, getting a nutritious meal on the table isn't as simple as jumping in the car and picking up food from the grocery store. InSight's Dominga Murray looked into a group trying for a homegrown solution to food insecurity.
At VCU's Institute of Contemporary Art, oregano, broccoli, and cabbage are just some of the things that Duran Chavis grows.
We see that the same neighborhoods that lack access to healthy food also have disproportionate ratios of chronic diseases.
In 2010, Chavis started planting his resiliency gardens.
If you're growing your own food, then you have a lot less anxiety around feeding your family.
Since I know how to grow my own food now, I can take care of my family and I don't have to rely on anyone. Chavis not only began the community garden exhibit at VCU Institute of Contemporary Art, but sits down with families like mine and shows us how to grow food.
Chavis suggested that historical accounts of racial redlining, where African Americans were withheld from owning homes, began what we know as food deserts today.
But it's really about, communities being able to address the problems that they have on their own terms. They're not waiting for somebody to come in and, save them.
For VCU InSight, I'm Dominga Murray.
Even after Halloween, there was still something spooky happening in Richmond. Here's InSight's Cameron Branscombe.
On the 1st of November, taking a break from broom riding, cauldron stirring, and spellcasting, the Diversity Center in Richmond held the first Witch Festival. Ariel Brinko attended the festival and says she enjoyed it.
Sometimes people look at you crazy on the street, but it was cool to be in a place that was like a like-minded group of people and you just felt like judge-free.
David James, the festival's co-founder, said he wanted for people who practice witchcraft to connect with others and shop from local witchcraft vendors.
You think of witches being, stuck in a cave somewhere, kind of staying to their own, not being open. And nowadays, that's not really necessary. We're allowed to be our true selves.
The Witch Festival has everything from stones and gems, tarot card readings, and handmade crafts.
James told me that all of the vendors' materials are ethically sourced.
Here, all are ethically sourced materials. So you're looking at your stones, your crystals, your herbs are all ethically sourced. We don't allow anything that has any relation to any form of punishment towards an animal or a creature.
James said he hoped the festival serves as an educational experience for people unfamiliar.
Well, I feel like if your mental concept of what witchcraft is only coming from like TVs and movies, that's not, an accurate representation. And a lot of that is really like played up for like shock factor or entertainment value. It's not really like that.
The Diversity Thrift does workshops on particular forms of witchcraft and also teaches different lessons about witchcraft history. For VCU InSight, I'm Cameron Branscombe.
When an election is over, most of the stories focus on who won, but InSight's Oliver Mendoza took a different track. He's got a story not about the outcome, but about why one candidate put his name on the ticket in the first place.
You may recognize the name from posters, banners, and signs around East Richmond.
What I find is really interesting about the Civil War is I teach a lot or talk a lot about what happened in the city of Richmond, in addition to what's happening all across the country, but specifically what's happening in the city of Richmond during the Civil War.
Joseph Rogers threw his hat in the ring for a city council seat this year. He works at the American Civil War Museum and says running for office is in his DNA. Rogers' family has a direct lineage to James Apostle Fields, a runaway enslaved man whose path to freedom took him from the U.S. Army to the House of Delegates.
Fields made his way from Hanover down to Richmond to live with his brother John until he is captured. He makes a second escape, only this time Fields makes his way to the river and ends up serving as a U.S. Army scout till he makes his way to Fort Monroe, where he is coincidentally reunited with his family who have separately escaped. James Apostle Fields would later be elected to the House of Delegates and be the last African-American man to serve in the General Assembly before Jim Crow.
Joseph's take on some history behind the Civil War shows the stark parallels to much of the unrest the country has seen this past summer. He references the women's bread riots of 1863.
They go to the governor's mansion. The governor decides to ignore them entirely.
And draws a comparison to the unrest that took place right here in Richmond.
It turns into a riot. They get so angry that they decide to take the food for themselves. Both the cases of the 1863 bread riots and in the 2020 uprisings, what was actually happening is that the government wasn't listening. These struggles don't just spontaneously generate. They gestate, and the anger and the hostility builds and builds over time because people aren't being listened to. And so if people are just listened to from the start, we have fewer instances of wide-scale upheaval and protest down the line. As the historian turned politician, right? Why it's important for me is making sure that all of our discussions, all of this debate is as public as possible, so that in the future, if it's 100 years from now, 50 years from now, 150 years from now, people know what we were talking about, why we were why we thought it was such a big deal, and they can have access to our thoughts and our feelings, so that as they're making decisions about their future and their children's future, they'll know more about what we were thinking than we know about what our ancestors were thinking, so that the long line of history can be truly and accurately represented, and so that we can continue on a path that is better for all of us and not just for some of us.
Reporting for VCU News, Oliver Mendoza.
Making it big in the music industry is hard enough in normal times, but what's it take to make it during a pandemic? InSight's Ryan Brown checked in with a local band.
Blue Ridge Rock Fest takes place every September in Appomattox, Virginia, and features some of the biggest names in rock music, as well as up-and-coming bands, but not this year.
We were looking forward to playing with a lot of these great bands.
For Richmond band Gravebound, it was especially crushing to lose that chance to play.
We're trying to hit, a new single every 3 months. We're not looking to record an album or an EP or anything like that. We're just trying to constantly release content. So each song, what we release, we want to have a music video for. We want to have guitar played through, drum played through.
With famous bands like Guar and Municipal Waste coming out of Richmond, the River City has a good track record for producing bands that get noticed.
Obviously, we want to kind of branch out and kind of do our own thing. We don't really go and follow everybody else's footsteps. We try to see what we can do to be a little bit different than the other bands around us to make us stand out.
Every member of Gravebound has been together since 2012, despite multiple variations of the band and hiatus. Every member of the original quartet is back together doing what they love. When it comes to the downtime created by COVID, Gravebound has been making the most of it.
I mean, James and Kyle have been grinding like crazy. James has been nonstop writing, Kyle has been nonstop writing, Joe has been nonstop writing. It's just, the whole band is just, we're running.
Martin wants to make sure that the fans feel the love as well.
I just want to say thank you to every single one of our fans, and I love you guys.
Reporting for VCU InSight, I'm Ryan Brown.
You're not like any other. You should really be yourself. That's the lesson from this new book. Here's Timothy Cantrell.
The Purple Grasshopper has gained the attention of parents as a book to read to their kids to show them that it's okay to be different. Local author Hannah Kizilbash got inspiration when telling her two daughters a story.
It started with my kids. They are both biracial, curly-haired girls. And so they were experiencing a couple of experiences with exclusion themselves.
The story follows the Purple Grasshopper who struggles with self-identity. By the end, she learns to accept herself for who she is. But this story has turned into more than just a book. Kizilbash teamed up with a VCU animation student to make it into a short film.
You wouldn't play when I was different. You only want me to be the same. But I can only be myself.
The animator, Andrew Hansaw, said he took on the project because the book resonated with him.
As someone who grew up biracial and was even picked on a few times in school because of it, I thought, wow, I'd really want to do this. This feels like it feels like it was calling out to me in a way.
The Purple Grasshopper is available for purchase on Amazon, as well as the website for Nodi Publishing. Reporting for VCU InSight, I'm Timothy Cantrell.
That does it for this edition of VCU InSight. Check out our YouTube channel every Friday to see our weekly newscast. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook. Let us know about any stories you'd like to see us cover. I'm Orzo Haji Gurban. Thanks for watching.